Folks, there will come tragedies in your life. And eventually, we all know one thing. We are going to die. Some of us sooner than others. And at the end of that life, we have to ask ourselves, was I the individual that I wanted to be?
Originating from deep inside the Rocky Mountains, transported through the power of the internet, and arriving inside your tiny earbuds. It's the Appraiser Coach Podcast.
Minisode.
And welcome back to another Minisode. Dustin Harris, once again, in the podcast chair. Want to pause here. Remind you that we are sponsored by ANOW Software. ANOW, a software that I use daily. Very rare, folks, that I don't open up ANOW either on my phone or on my laptop, because it's where I go for reference on how I'm doing as an appraiser and how my business is doing. You can find out more by going to anow.com, ANOW.com. Now, I'm going to reveal a little something behind the scenes. I'm going to pull back the curtain just a bit today because you're going to see how sometimes I record these far in advance of when they're actually played. Because the story that I'm about to tell you was national news, and many of you might remember and think to yourself, my gosh, wasn't that like a long time ago? And the answer is yes, it was a long time ago. It was May of 2021, and I know this will not air for quite a while, mainly because I have the series about the principles of prosperity that are playing, and I think those will go through August. So nonetheless, that's going to date myself. I'm actually recording this just a couple of weeks after an incident that happened in my hometown. Now, I am not trying to capitalize on that incident. In fact, I actually hesitated quite heavily about even talking about this situation because I did not want to exploit the situation in any way. The reason I've chosen to speak about this issue in brief today is because I think there is a lesson to be learned. I do know that appraisers listen to this program, and I do know that sometimes this program allows us all to step back and to think a little bit. And that's my goal today. If nothing else, I hope that we will each pause today and just think a little bit about our lives, a little bit about our families and our relationships. And I hope that this will, as it was to me, be a bit of a wake-up call to those of you who might be out there listening to this program. Okay, let me set it up. It was a Thursday morning, and I was driving home from Driggs, Idaho. It was quite early in the morning. I had been to Driggs and was on my way back. Driggs is about an hour from my home, and I had met with an individual at about 8 o'clock in the morning, and I was nearly home. It was a little after 9, and I was driving south on Highway 20. As I was driving south, I was getting ready to pass a car. I was on the right side lane, and the car in front of me was going a little slower than I had liked. I signaled and looked behind me. Just as I looked behind me, I saw a cop with the lights flashing, and then immediately heard the siren whiz past me, I kid you not, at least 100 miles an hour. Now, this is a highway that the top speed should only be 70, okay, just to give you some reference. Immediately, I saw a second state policeman pass me going about 100 miles per hour. I thought, wow, that's fast. I wonder what's going on. I pulled off the highway as I was heading to my home and turned onto another highway, Highway 48, that goes to my home. And I'm driving down Highway 48, and yet another policeman, another state cop, this happens to be a friend of mine that I went to high school with, who became a state cop and lives just down the road from me, came past me. I don't know, doing 100, but darn close. Now, this is a highway that the top speed is 55. I immediately thought something major is going wrong, and something major is happening. I got a call about 30 seconds later from my son, who was at home, and said, Dad, did you hear what's going on? And I said, well, I saw a bunch of cops. I assumed something big is going on. He said, Dad, there's a shooting at the middle school. And I said, really? Are you sure? Is it confirmed? And he said, that's what's on the news. Now, my son is 13 going on 14. In fact, he'll be 14 when this airs. And my son would have been at that school had he not been homeschooled. Now, you probably heard the news reports. You probably heard what happened. In brief, a girl, I believe 12 or 13, came to middle school. She was a student at the school and had been so marginalized and so made fun of and bullied that she felt like she had no other choice but to go to this dark place and perform this act of violence. Fortunately, though 3 people were shot, no one was killed, and all 3 people have made a full recovery. The individual was apprehended by a teacher at the school, a teacher whom I went to high school with, an individual I know, not well, but I know her. And she did it by talking in love and kindness as she walked toward the shooter, pulling her into a hug, and then relinquishing the gun from her hands. Now, this incident, folks, has shaken up our small community. Rigby, Idaho has between 3,000 and 4,000 people in it. It is a farm community. It is a recreational community. It is not a big metropolis. Even the nearby city of Idaho Falls only has about 70,000 people. This is Idaho. This is where we live. We are a community of love and neighbor and friends and family. And this kind of thing does not happen in our community. And yet it does. And when it does, we step back and we start to ask ourselves, what is important? What is life about? What are relationships about? Why are we doing what we're doing? When we get back from the break, I want to ask some of those important questions because they are questions that I have asked myself. But I want to pause here first and remind you that we're sponsored by a great company. This company, of course, is ANOW Software. ANOW is a program that I started using a few years ago. Now, the reason I started using them was, frankly, Marty twisted my arm. Well, back then it was Keith. And said, you really need to try this program. You really need to try this program. And really nobody knew about this program at the time I was approached. Folks, I told him no for 3 months. They twisted my arm for 3 months. Thank heavens they did. What an amazing program. Folks, the cost for ANOW is minuscule compared to the value that you will receive in return. Check them out. Go to anow.com. And by the way, if you're skeptical about the cost, how about 30% off for the first 3 months when you use the coupon code PODCAST30, PODCAST30. It's anow.com. Welcome back to this mini-sode, everyone. Dustin Harris just told a story that happened in my community, a sad story. An individual who turned to the unspeakable to deal with her emotions and her stress and her inability to find friends. And my heart reaches out to this young lady. My heart reaches out to the victims. And frankly, in a community this small, we are all victims when something like this occurs. But there is always a silver lining to every dark cloud. The silver lining for me has been this opportunity for me to step back for just a moment. To step back and ask myself, what is important? Now, I know that is a general question, and I know that a life coach will ask you that often, but folks, have you really, honestly, truly, sincerely taken the time to ask yourself that question lately? I truly, sincerely, honestly encourage you to do so, because I have. There's been quiet moments after this incident that I've had to step back, and maybe even somewhat emotionally, I'll admit that. Ask myself, what is truly important? My son could have been one of those victims. My friends, my family members, I had nephews and nieces at that school. I had neighbors at that school. I've talked to my neighbor middle school friends who have said I was there and heard the shots. And I ducked in my classroom and I didn't know what to do. My gosh, can you imagine? When something like this occurs, it makes me step back. What does this have to do with appraising, Dustin? Well, I want you to ask yourself the question, what is it that you're doing? Why are you here? Why did you become an appraiser in the first place? It may not have anything to do with appraisal, but it has everything to do with your life. Folks, there will come tragedies in your life. And eventually, we all know one thing. We are going to die. Some of us sooner than others. And at the end of that life, we have to ask ourselves, was I the individual that I wanted to be? Was I everything to everyone that I could be? Was I everything I could be as a spouse? As a parent, as a neighbor, as a friend, as an extended family member, as a human being, as a citizen? And the answer to that is, of course you weren't. You can't be. None of us can be. We're human. We fail. We get busy. We put our nose down and trudge through all of these reports that are due next Friday. But if there's anything that can be good that would come from an episode like this, I hope, even though you weren't here. And let's face it, I wasn't either. The closest I got was the cop that passed me on the road. Well, maybe the closest I got was the discussions that I had with those that were there and felt their empathy and their sincerity and their emotion. But nonetheless, these episodes allow us to step back and to say why. Why do we do what we do? Do we love our lives? Do we take time to relax and enjoy life? Folks, yesterday I had a little time in the afternoon. I made a little time in the afternoon, and I said, you know what? I haven't been to a movie in a long time. COVID has shut down the theaters in our area until just recently, and it's open. And I said, screw it. I'm going. And I did. And I went by myself. And there were 3 people in the theater, me and 2 other people. And I loved it. And I enjoyed it. And I enjoyed getting away. And I enjoyed chomping on my popcorn and sipping my drink and watching someone else's world in front of me. Fictional, yes, but watching someone else's world in front of me. Getting out of my own world for a minute. Folks, I'm not saying that movies are what it's all about. Certainly it's a fictional world. But taking time to be human, taking time to enjoy your life, that's what it's all about. Last Saturday, myself and 2 of my sons went to Kelly's Canyon, which is about 20 minutes to the east of us in the mountains. And we went riding motorcycles for close to 5 hours. And we went through some crazy, crazy stuff, including at one point I had to text my wife and say, we are not lost. We are not hurt. We are not in danger. I promise I will be home. But we're in a bit of a pickle right now. So we'll be home after dark. In other words, don't worry, we're getting there, but this is taking much longer than I anticipated. Folks, that is what life is all about. Those experiences. As we're driving home from riding, my son, 13 years old again, turned to me and said, Dad, I'll never forget that trip. And I said, yep, son, you never will.
You've been listening to the Appraiser Coach podcast with Dustin Harris. If you like what you hear, please give us a 5-star rating and post a short review on iTunes. For more in-depth insider information on how you can make more money as a real estate appraiser, visit theappraisercoach.com and sign up for the All-Star team today. Thanks for joining us. And now, get out there and create some value.